There's an illusion many of us fall victim to when looking at the architecture of a major city. We see a new towering glass skyscraper with a shiny facade and automatically assume our city is becoming more successful. We see endless articles about housing booms and infrastructure spending, and the cultural spotlight is permanently fixed on the creation phase of the economy, wherein we naturally treat the erection of new buildings as the ultimate metric of progress. What's conveniently ignored, though, is the violent destruction that makes that progress possible. Physical space in a modern, booming metropolis is fiercely limited. Expanding the footprint of a city almost always requires destroying what came before. Every time an aging commercial block is leveled to make way for a modern apartment complex, thousands of tons of shattered concrete, twisted steel, and splintered timber are ripped from the foundations. This relentless cycle of urban renewal creates a tidal wave of debris that has to go somewhere. Managing all of that rubble fuels an entirely separate multi-billion-dollar economic engine that operates completely out of sight. This is the story of Bingo Industries, and how one family looked at that endless stream of demolition rubble and realized they were staring at a goldmine. Let's rewind back to Sydney in the early to mid-2000s. The city was undergoing a profound structural shift. Driven by strong population growth, highly favorable lending conditions, and a surge in both domestic and foreign investment, the demand for housing and commercial space exploded. Developers were aggressively acquiring land across the metropolitan area, knocking down low-density housing and erecting high-rise apartment complexes to maximize yield. This frenzy of activity created a corresponding explosion in a specific category of refuse known as construction and demolition waste, commonly referred to in the industry as C&D. The general public rarely distinguishes between different types of garbage, but the economic realities of C&D waste are vastly different from the putrescible waste collected from household curbside bins. Household garbage consists mostly of organic matter, food scraps, and lightweight packaging. Construction waste is heavy, bulky, abrasive, and incredibly difficult to manage. According to data published by the Australian Bureau of Statistics and various environmental protection agencies, masonry materials account for a massive percentage of all waste generated nationally, with the construction sector producing millions of tons of this heavy refuse every single year. Dealing with this sheer volume of material is a constant, critical headache for builders. Space on an active construction site is incredibly tight. A multi-million-dollar development simply doesn't have the spare square footage to let piles of broken bricks block the path of heavy machinery. Even worse, they can't afford to pay expensive tradies to stand around doing nothing just because a skip bin is full. Time is the ultimate currency in the building game. Tony Tartak stepped directly into this unforgiving environment in 2005 when he bought a modest skip bin business in Western Sydney for under $1 million. He inherited a tiny operation consisting of just 4 trucks and about 100 bins. At the time, the local waste hauling sector was a mess of small independent operators who treated the job as a basic trucking route, casually driving from point A to point B whenever they got around to it. Tony Tartak and his son Daniel approached this chaos differently. They stripped away the casual trucking mentality and rebuilt the business strictly around high-precision logistics. By tightening their route density and running rigorous maintenance schedules on the vehicles, they essentially eliminated the waiting game. Whenever a site manager called for a bin swap, a bingo truck was dispatched immediately. In order to cut through a heavily fragmented market, they painted their entire fleet of trucks and skip bins a glaring, unmistakable orange. As the Sydney property boom accelerated, those bright orange bins became synonymous with reliability. Site managers happily paid a slight premium for the speed because an empty bin kept their demolition moving. That reputation locked in the lucrative long-term contracts Bingo needed to generate steady cash, funding a rapid expansion that transformed a tiny 4-truck operation into a dominant regional player. Becoming a dominant force in the hauling game was a brilliant start, but as Bingo's fleet multiplied, the Tartak family ran headfirst into the brutal economic reality of modern waste management. Picking up the rubble is only the first and arguably the easiest part of the financial equation. The ultimate profit margin is completely dictated by where that rubble actually goes after it leaves the construction site. And in the early 2000s, simply dumping it into a hole in the ground was rapidly becoming the most expensive option available. In New South Wales, the government enforces environmental responsibility through aggressive financial penalties. To stop the construction sector from blindly dumping recoverable materials and rapidly exhausting Sydney's finite landfill space, the state applies strict regulations backed by punishing disposal levies. These taxes climbed relentlessly throughout the property boom, and eventually, the levy pushed past $160 for every single ton of waste dropped into a traditional landfill. This created a terrifying paradox for a growing business. Every time a bingo truck rolled into a third-party dump to empty a load, the company bled cash. As their market share expanded and their trucks collected exponentially more waste, these disposal fees mutated into a massive financial liability. The Tartak family realized that if they stayed strictly in the transport lane, they were effectively just acting as a collection agency for the landlords who owned the dumps and the politicians who set the taxes. Their profits would always be squeezed from both sides. To protect their margins, they needed to own the entire board. The company initiated a massive strategic pivot, aggressively acquiring land to build their own transfer stations and recycling yards. But moving from transport into heavy industrial processing is a monumental leap. Building a waste recycling center requires securing elusive environmental protection permits, fighting through hostile local councils, and dropping tens of millions of dollars on specialized sorting machinery. More importantly, it requires overcoming intense community resistance because nobody wants a massive, dusty, noisy waste facility operating anywhere near their residential suburb. However, these extreme capital and regulatory demands actually worked heavily in Bingo's favor by creating an impenetrable barrier to entry. Anyone can take out a business loan, buy a truck, and start undercutting prices on skip-in rentals, but a new competitor can't simply snap their fingers and acquire the vast tracts of industrially zoned land and the EPA approvals required to process thousands of tons of commercial debris. By securing these incredibly rare physical assets, Bingo locked down a regional monopoly over the life cycle of Sydney's construction waste. They engineered a perfectly closed economic system. When a bingo truck collected waste from a client, the company generated revenue through its collection and transport services before moving the material into its own network of facilities. Rather than relying entirely on third-party disposal sites, a growing share of material was directed into bingo-operated transfer stations and recycling centers, reflecting an industry structure shaped by landfill levies, zoning restrictions, and environmental regulation. They took the mechanics a step further by turning the garbage itself into a secondary revenue stream. Demolition rubble is essentially just building material in a disorganized state. Bingo bought the heavy industrial crushers needed to grind old concrete down into certified road base, and they brought in industrial shredders to turn discarded timber into landscaping mulch and particle board feed. They were executing a perfect financial loop, getting paid by builders to haul away a problem, processing that problem in-house, and selling it straight back to the construction supply chain as raw materials. This setup pushed their resource recovery rates past 90%, diverting massive volumes of material away from traditional landfills and maximizing the cash extracted from every single orange bin they touched. The ultimate expression of that perfect financial loop took shape at Eastern Creek, a major industrial hub in Sydney's western suburbs. As Bingo expanded into a dominant market force, they poured capital into developing a sprawling multi-acre compound they named the Recycling Ecology Park. The goal was to consolidate their entire operation, building a highly sophisticated manufacturing plant right alongside a massive engineered landfill to handle the unrecyclable overflow. The centerpiece of this park was the Materials Processing Center 2, a facility engineered to handle a staggering throughput of up to 300 tons of material every single hour. In order to manage that immense volume, the company integrated artificial intelligence, high-speed optical sorters, and robotic arms directly into the sorting architecture. As the demolition debris raced down the conveyor belts, the AI software utilized machine learning models to instantly identify different materials. If a piece of timber came down the line alongside a chunk of concrete and a strip of commercial plastic, the optical sensors classified the items in milliseconds. This real-time data directed robotic arms and pneumatic air jets to precisely separate the streams. The automation drastically reduced contamination rates and ensured the final recycled products met the strict quality standards demanded by civil construction firms. But even with a 90% recovery rate, the remaining 10% of unrecyclable debris still had to be buried in the adjacent landfill pit. The problem is that when thousands of tons of discarded drywall and plasterboard get buried in a landfill and soaked by rain, the gypsum inside them reacts with the buried timber and cardboard. In the dark, oxygen-deprived depths of the pit, bacteria feed on this mixture and release hydrogen sulfide, a gas that smells exactly like rotting eggs. When that stench began drifting over the neighboring suburbs, furious residents flooded the authorities with hundreds of complaints. The backlash escalated so quickly that the New South Wales Environment Protection Authority intervened, launching a formal investigation that culminated in a successful court prosecution against a bingo subsidiary. The standard industry practice for dealing with this kind of landfill gas involves installing basic flares to blindly burn the emissions into the atmosphere just to avoid further regulatory fines. Bingo chose to view the escaping gas as an untapped commercial asset. They partnered with a specialized Australian clean energy firm called LGI and engineered a way to extract tangible financial value directly from the decomposing waste. They drilled 60 separate gas wells, plunging 30 meters deep directly into the landfill mass sitting right next to their factory. These wells functioned as a massive vacuum system, actively capturing the methane, carbon dioxide, and hydrogen sulfide before it could escape through the surface and into the atmosphere. The captured gas was piped directly into a custom-built power generator located on the same site. After the moisture and contaminants were scrubbed from the gas, the refined fuel was fed into 4 1-megawatt engines, and this system converted the highly problematic foul-smelling emissions into enough renewable electricity to power Bingo's massive recycling operations around the clock, solving their PR problem and saving a good amount of money on energy costs and fines. Eastern Creek proved that Bingo's vertically integrated model was highly scalable, but the local Sydney market could no longer contain their ambitions. By 2017, the Tartak family envisioned a sprawling national footprint, eyeing aggressive expansions into the highly lucrative commercial markets of Victoria and Queensland. Acquiring entrenched competitors and building high-tech recycling centres across state lines required access to deep, highly liquid pools of capital, prompting Bingo Industries to tap the public markets. In May of that year, the company executed an initial public offering on the Australian Securities Exchange, with shares hitting the board at $1.80, placing the company's market capitalization at roughly $750 million. Under the leadership of Daniel Tartak, who had fully taken the reins as CEO, the company now possessed the financial firepower to execute its national expansion strategy. Bingo initiated a massive acquisition spree across the eastern seaboard, and they systematically targeted mid-sized operators, buying up fleets, transfer stations, and crucial operating licenses to instantly expand their geographic reach. This rapid consolidation phase peaked in 2018 when Bingo announced a $578 million buyout of Dialer Dump Industries. The Dialer Dump was a formidable rival in the New South Wales market, founded by prominent waste industry entrepreneur Ian Malouf. He had built his own massive empire anchored by a sprawling landfill and processing site in Alexandria. The proposed merger between the two companies sent shockwaves through the entire construction sector because it threatened to combine the two largest players in the commercial and demolition waste space into a single dominant behemoth. A corporate consolidation of this magnitude immediately triggered intense scrutiny from the ACCC. The federal antitrust regulator was deeply concerned that the merged entity would wield unchecked market power. If Bingo controlled too much of the processing infrastructure, they could unilaterally drive up prices for waste disposal across the entire Sydney basin. The ACCC launched a grueling review process, conducting deep investigations into the sector's market share, pricing dynamics, and the availability of alternative facilities for construction firms. To satisfy the regulator and prevent the deal from being blocked in federal court, Bingo was forced to make significant structural concessions. They agreed to divest a major processing facility located at Banksmeadow, selling it to a private equity group called CPE Capital for $50 million. This legally binding divestiture ensured that a viable, independent competitor remained operational in that specific geographic corridor. Once these regulatory hurdles were finally cleared in early 2019, the massive acquisition went through. The deal significantly strengthened Bingo's position in the building and demolition waste sector in New South Wales and saw Ian Malouf become involved at board level as a non-executive director of Bingo Industries, reflecting the integration of two major participants in the Australian waste management industry. This relentless physical expansion, coupled with the high-tech processing capabilities at Eastern Creek and the massive market share, had successfully captured the attention of the heaviest hitters in global finance. Massive global funds, those whose portfolio is in the hundreds of billions of dollars, are constantly hunting for very specific types of investments. Long-life assets that generate highly predictable, inflation-linked cash flows. Most importantly, they target businesses that are absolutely essential to the functioning of a modern economy and protected by incredibly high regulatory barriers to entry. Waste management fits this investment thesis flawlessly. It doesn't matter if the stock market crashes, interest rates spike, or consumer spending dries up. Garbage continues to be produced, and governments strictly mandate its proper processing. It was this thinking that convinced a consortium, led by Macquarie Asset Management, to launch a massive, unsolicited takeover bid for Bingo Industries in early 2021. Macquarie is frequently referred to within the Australian financial press as the Millionaire's Factory. They're renowned globally for their aggressive and highly successful strategies in acquiring and managing infrastructure assets like toll roads, airports, and public utilities. The consortium finalized the buyout agreement, taking Bingo Industries private in a massive deal valued at roughly $2.3 billion. Public shareholders were offered a cash consideration of $3.45 per share, which represented a massive premium over the original listing price. The complex structure of the buyout also allowed major stakeholders to take a combination of cash and unlisted shares in the new private holding company, meaning the Tartak family and other key insiders still maintained a portion of their holdings into the new private entity. For most companies, securing that kind of multi-billion-dollar premium from a giant like Macquarie is the final chapter of the story. But inside Bingo Industries, the transition exposed the darker, historical mechanics of the Sydney waste industry and pulled back the curtain on how those massive profit margins were actually being generated. In 2022, the ACCC wrapped up a massive, multi-year criminal investigation into the Sydney demolition waste market that revealed a blatant price-fixing cartel. The investigation laid out a deeply entrenched culture of collusion between Bingo and its closest competitors. Executives illegally coordinated their pricing strategies, which artificially inflated the cost of waste removal for building firms and property developers across the city. It effectively siphoned millions of dollars out of the construction supply chain and directly into the pockets of the cartel. In the fallout from the ACCC investigation, Daniel Tartak, the former CEO, the son of the founder, and the primary architect of the company's massive public expansion, pleaded guilty to criminal cartel offenses in federal court. He formally exited the board of directors, permanently severing the leadership ties between the Tartak family and the daily operations of the empire they had built. Bingo Industries itself also pleaded guilty to the criminal charges, taking a massive financial hit and suffering severe reputational damage. The scandal completely shattered the polished corporate sustainability image the company had projected to the public. Macquarie suddenly found itself managing a massive public relations disaster alongside its new multi-billion-dollar asset, forcing the firm to initiate a ruthless internal overhaul of Bingo's corporate governance to permanently purge the cartel culture from the ranks. Purging the cartel culture was just the first crisis Macquarie had to navigate. The deeper threat lay in the fundamental financial logic of the buyout itself. As mentioned earlier, the dealmakers had treated an industrial waste collection business as a highly predictable, bond-like infrastructure asset, assuming it was practically immune to economic downturns. That thesis shattered almost immediately after the company went private. The Australian construction sector entered a brutal slump fueled by decades-high inflation, extreme weather delays, and aggressive interest rate hikes that choked off property development loans. When the cranes stopped moving, the demolition sites went quiet. This exposed the fatal flaw in Macquarie's strategy. Construction waste is inextricably tethered to the health of the broader property market. Without a constant stream of heavy debris rolling over the weighbridges, Bingo couldn't generate the cash required to service its highly leveraged debt from the takeover. The complex financial structure that looked brilliant during a boom rapidly turned into a suffocating liability. As financial pressure mounted, rumors circulated that investment bankers were quietly testing the market for a potential fire sale. Opportunistic buyers from the broader building materials sector, including Kerry Stokes' SGH Holdings, began circling the company in hopes of acquiring the infrastructure at a steep discount. Macquarie's massive miscalculation left the company highly vulnerable, but a corporate debt crisis is entirely separate from the physical reality of the business. The trajectory of Bingo Industries proves that immense wealth often hides exactly where society refuses to look. The Tartak family recognized the financial potential within discarded demolition rubble and rewired the logistical architecture of the Australian construction sector. They transformed the unglamorous job of hauling broken concrete into a highly defensible empire. The aftermath of that success serves as a direct warning about the danger of corporate assumptions. When global infrastructure funds bought the company, they assumed they'd acquired an invincible asset. Macquarie failed to respect the cyclical gravity of the property market, and their misstep showed that sophisticated financial models are useless if they ignore the physical realities of the industry they're attempting to consolidate. Despite the boardroom scandals and the suffocating debt, the infrastructure built by Bingo Industries remains a massive net positive for the environment. The sprawling recycling parks, the AI-driven sorting facilities, and the methane-capturing power grids permanently raise the standard for resource recovery. As cities continue to expand and rebuild, this advanced infrastructure is an absolute necessity. A private equity firm might struggle to balance the books during a recession, but the machinery left behind continues to operate, diverting millions of tons of debris away from traditional landfills. But what do you think? Did Macquarie make a rare miscalculation, or is private equity entirely unsuited for the volatile reality of the construction sector? Drop your thoughts in the comments section below. We want to hear if you ever had to hire a skip bin or deal with the chaos of construction waste on a renovation project. But anyways guys, if you enjoyed this deep dive into the technicalities of construction waste, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and ring that bell for future videos. Thank you so much for watching and stay curious.